Oh, there we go. I think it is working. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just wait a couple of minutes while we get a few more people to join, and then we'll get started. Great. Well, we seem like we've got everyone's really punctual and joining really quickly, so we might get started, and hopefully people will join as we go. Well, thank you everyone for joining this afternoon for the Next Hotel Open House session. It's a shame it is a virtual session, but nevertheless we'll persevere. I'm Bronwyn McColl. I am a interior designer with Bagot Melbourne, and I'm joined today by my colleague Isabel Munro, and we both worked on the project. So we're going to take you through today what is this virtual tour. Isabel and I thought it might be a nice idea, given that the tour was meant to be sort of a behind the scenes look at the hotel, which we can't do physically. We thought for the virtual option, what we might do is give you a bit of a behind the scenes look at the design process. So for those who are on the call who are designers, you'll be familiar with what goes on, but for those who might not or might not be part of a hotel project, we thought it might be interesting to show you some of the nuances that we go through. So before we get started, I would like to make an acknowledgement of country, and that we acknowledge the traditional owners on the country in which we meet today and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. The other recognition we would like to make today before we get started is the incredible team that's a part of this whole process and the project that hopefully you'll get to visit or have visited recently. The team that you see listed here is our interior design team, but they're only a small part of the incredible project. And the hotel itself, the building sits within the 80 Collins Street precinct, and that precinct has been a part of the Bagot and QIC project for over 14 years. And so the duration of these types of projects, you can imagine the number of people that contribute to them. So here listed is the interior design component. Bagot with UN Studio were the architects for the project. And then along with ourselves, we were really fortunate to have an incredible collaboration with our clients as well, those being QIC and Catherine Ellis, who is our design manager and fundamental to getting this project happening. We also had Paul Wiest from the Next Story group, and he was our design manager from the client side. And then we also had an incredible team from the Multiplex group as well, with Michelle, Josh, Ian and the rest of their team, and they were real champions in making sure that the design vision did get realised. So we couldn't have done it without everyone, and there's probably a few people we've missed there, but it gives you an idea of the depth of the team that's needed to make one of these projects come to life. The last sort of, I guess, interesting stat we wanted to talk about before we jump into the actual design itself is the fact that this project was completed during the lockdown last year with COVID. And it's a really strange, I guess, for us as designers, thing to be involved with, because usually hotel projects, they finish and literally the next day is usually the opening night, and the doors are opening to the public, and it's a sort of a mad dash to the finish line. With the Next Hotel, we finished and it sat there for many, many months before it was able to be open to the public. And so for us, it was a really strange, almost anticlimactic, while you're kind of waiting, knowing that there's this new building waiting for everyone to discover. So it's been fantastic for us as designers recently to see the building open with the Next Hotel, and David Ness, who is the GM there, and Susan and the rest of the team who have brought this place to life and welcomed people in from all over the place. So it's lovely to see them celebrating the building, and also seeing everyone on Instagram and through travel reviews, which we do look at. It's really lovely to see how people are enjoying the spaces, but also what's working, what's not working, and how is it being used in the way that we thought it would, or perhaps in different ways. And as designers, we always take on those learnings as well. So keep posting if you are there, and you get to hopefully see it in the near future. So with that in mind, I'm going to now hand over to Isabel, who's going to take you through the front of house part of the project.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Yes, as Bronwyn mentioned, I'm an interior designer at Horse Bazaar and was involved, especially in that front of house design and the development of those spaces, as well as just with the whole team, because we're a very sort of fluid team where we all jump in, help out where it's needed. So there's never kind of one just person who's involved. And I think part of our approach at Woods Bagot is to make sure the design narrative is really strong, has a basis that we can always come back to through the design process and make sure that we are staying true to it. And with the 80 Collins Hotel specifically, we had a lot of amazing context that we could draw from. During our research, we found some really interesting maps, and I'm a big fan of finding old maps and working out what used to be there before. And interestingly enough, that site was a horse bazaar in the late 1800s. It was close to, and is still close to, Chinatown. And we started kind of pull these links with how, you know, the business, how the hotel was kind of focusing on business travellers, and how there was this really beautiful link between the people who were coming from China, settling in that area, who were kind of the original business travellers. A lot of them set up businesses in that area. There was pottery, woodworking, and, you know, all these trades that were so close to this site, who, yeah, had brought their knowledge, their culture, and for us to be able to kind of then start pulling some of this into our story about, you know, local crafts, the use of some potteries, and, you know, the little horsey details, was a really amazing to have that, to be actually able to hang our hat on. Also the location to the Paris end, a little bit later in the 1950s, you know, obviously it's still really recognised as that. So that was another sort of layer that we could bring to the story. And, you know, just a lot of Melbourne stories as well. So, you know, I think I mentioned we had these kind of different layers of storytelling that we wanted to talk about. So there was the Chinatown, which was really focused on craft making and the social side of things. The bazaar, that was a lot to do with the details, materiality. You'll start to see in some of the final product, you know, the use of steel, leathers, and then also the other sort of ideas around the Paris and the couture, the detailing. Obviously, it's locale, being urban, and creating for the client who was hoping to use this as kind of a rebrand for themselves, what it meant to be the next hotel. And they kept saying to us, you know, for them, it's a what's next. So, you know, we sort of saw that as like these kind of moments of delight or curiosity that when you go, you go once and then you find the story and then you're like, what's next? So we had a lot to work on, which was amazing. I'll just flick through these, but yeah, so the Chinatown, obviously the location, but also the handmade, the trades, the being the craftsmen and the makers. Horse Bazaar, again, that was the leatherwork, metalwork, detailing, etc. Paris and fabrics, stitching, a lot of that sort of came into the room concept, which Brian will talk about after I've gone through the front of house. So this was one of our war rooms. You can see, you know, we sort of, during the conceptual stage, there's a lot of ideas floating around, sort of pinning up, sketching, going back to our concepts, revisiting, you know, so there was, it's great that we have kind of this in our studio space where we can like really expand our ideas in a visual sense. People come past, they make comments. So yeah, that's a bit of behind the scenes. it is chaotic, and we do try and make it a little bit nice. We've got some flowers there and a bit of greenery. But you can sort of see on the table there some early development with the palettes, which you'll sort of see continuing through the presentation. A lot of the original ideas are still very much there, which is great, because over the course of the project, quite often you can feel like you've really deviated away from your original conceptual ideas, but I think we still managed to have a lot of those still ring true. So I'm going to jump right up to level 2. So in this particular project, the reception's on level 2. Though, in saying that, this is the ground floor concierge, and no, I don't work at the hotel. You'll see me pop up a few times. It's not my second job yet. So that's on the ground floor. There's just a small concierge, but basically you arrive up to level 2. The reception desk is sort of straight ahead. And to the right is the reception lounge, which is sort of sits to the little columns facade. And then there's centrally there's a stair up to level 3, which is our sort of hospitality level. And then on the left-hand side of the page there is the club lounge, which is kind of similar idea to like a Qantas lounge or something. It's where people can come and there's food offered all day, drinks, they can book meeting rooms. It's almost a little bit co-working because there's a connection through to Nauru House. There's a bridge there. So the idea is to kind of get people from business people who are staying or people who are working to be able to actually come and use these spaces. So there I am, checking in guests.
Doing an amazing job.
And here you'll see some of Bron's beautiful early drawings of our reception desk. The green stone that we used, part of the palette and the idea, drawing on some of the colours and thoughts around in the sort of Chinatown connection, what was seen as kind of the riches and things that people were seeking, which was like gold and, obviously in a Chinese culture, jade green is a very opulent and sort of treasured element. We weren't going to make our desk out of jade, but, that sort of green story is links back to that. And then the backdrop to the reception desk, having this real gold luster. Again, that kind of, a lot of the people that were traveling over here were traveling for the gold rush. So there was that kind of hint towards the past and the reason for traveling. It was also one of our moments of delight as well as you come out, this kind of beautiful full height shimmering screen. Excuse me. I'm obviously not used to talking this much. This is an early palette. You can sort of see the stone on the bottom left. Some of those gold ridges, sorry.
It's all right. I'll take over while you have a drink. So in terms of what Isabel was talking about with the various finishes, you can see the idea of the gold coming in. And at this point, it was a rigid material and back with this green stone. And so we started to explore, this was the holistic palette, but with the gold, how could we actually get that sort of luster that we'd originally envisioned? So this was some of the testing that Isabel was doing. We looked at rigid panels, but what we noticed when we actually looked at them in situ, they were quite crinkled. And therefore, we sort of felt that if they weren't installed correctly, we could have this sort of awkward crinkle, and we actually wanted more of a draping gold. So where we ended up was thinking that a painted wall with a gold mesh fabric would be a better solution. We looked at curtaining, but again, it didn't quite have that, the depth or the architectural form that we were after. So we ended up going to a metal curtain. And so Isabel, I reckon, had about 50 samples of gold paint in the studio, all up on the wall. These were just 2, and we had about 10 different chain mesh, if you like, options as well, some quite big scale. and some quite small. But in the testing, we realised the small scale was needed to create the reflection that we wanted in the lighting. So there was quite a lot of testing, and the final test was in situ on site on quite a large wall with a large panel as well of the curtain. So once we were able to sort of finalise down to two, which were these were the final two, we then went to site and were able to test those in situ. And once you see the outcome later on, hopefully you'll see the kind of comparison to the render. These are some of Isabel's shots from when she was out on site selecting the stone.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll hand back to you, Is.
Thank you. Hopefully I don't get another coffee attack. Yeah,
At least we know it's live, it's not pre-recorded.
I've obviously had a very quiet week, not a lot of talking. So yeah, we, as part of our process, go and select the actual stone that goes into the project, especially, something so important as that first experience of the desk. So you generally get out and about, and that was the stone that was selected. And you can see here's our original render, which I might have missed what Bron said, but our the CEO of Next was very keen for us to be able to replicate this as much as possible, and hopefully, we did do that.
Yeah.
And the final shot. So, it's quite a process from the initial conception right up to the outcome, and this sort of gives some views into the lounge space. That's the back of Bronwyn's head there. She's having a guess.
Just lounging around the hotel.
And you can see some of the other sort of gold elements that are pulled out from the handrails into the styling, and just towards past Bronwyn, you can see the club lounge. That's the reception to that area. So this space, we focus on the idea of the maker and the workshop. So there was kind of this reference back to sort of what a workshop environment is like, the loftiness, some of the steel framing that's present, and it was obviously still needs to be a work space and a lounge space, so bringing also some refinement to that. Client was very keen for us to incorporate Chinese inspired, or they wanted us to find antique Chinese rugs, but just commercially and practically, that's a very kind of difficult thing. Obviously, as a public space, it needs to hit safety and certain sign-offs by authorities, so we actually needed to get them made. So there was quite a lot of process getting some custom rugs made, inspired by sort of antique designs. Here you can see some of the selection process that we went through, design on the bottom right there. That was sort of inspired from some Art Deco patterns, Chinese rugs that we sourced, that we worked with Tai Ping, who are a Chinese rug manufacturer and are represented here by Whitecliffe, and they produce these amazing and large scale rugs. You can sort of see there that was 4 meters across, and I think it was even longer. So yeah, quite a process. This was our render. There was some blue tones that we pulled out in this particular space to also kind of, I guess, represent the colours that you find in Chinese crockery, and so the white and the blue, and at the pattern stone that you can see being this kind of highly figured white with black cracking, and again that sort of talks to the idea of like antique plates and things, and you can sort of see some of the styling elements there, those plates. So it was all sort of macro to micro with the way that they played out. But some pretty pretty amazing stone. And then we we're lucky enough to have a client that was very keen to have some local artists, and this is a Nietzsche. What's his first name? Sorry, Nietzsche.
Johnny.
That's it, Johnny Nietzsche. He also has some amazing prints in the rooms, but this was a large scale print of his, which obviously amazing with our colour palette, but just a beautiful piece too. So our journey continues up the central stair that connects the level 2 to the reception, to the restaurant and bar on level 3. And you can also see in that shot the custom light that was made for this space, which used the gold link from the reception backdrop. And we were really amazed and quite excited by the beautiful patterning that it produced on the ceiling. And because it's not fixed, it sort of subtly moves, which is really lovely. It's just this subtle light play on the ceiling, which was a great result. One we weren't expecting, and sometimes it's nice to have those little surprises. Moment of delight.
Absolutely, an unexpected moment of delight.
Yeah. So this restaurant has, and bar is being named La Madonna. We worked with, we were given a brief, a hospitality brief from a company called EDG, who are based in Singapore, who had analysed the market and suggested to Next the way that they could sort of approach this area, what was missing, what would be a good fit. So they gave us a very detailed brief. The bar side, they talked about this idea of Amaro, spirit making, barrel aging. So that became a really big driver in the layout and the design. And they wanted this tasting room, which is that kind of central, along the facade, central special little container that has barrels on display. It has a table that you can actually roll a barrel and open it, and it flows down the table, very ceremonial. And our approach to this space was looking at Amaro making, and originally that was for medicinal purposes. So we kind of played on that little idea with the backdrop to the bar being kind of almost like an apothecary style display with a ladder. And then obviously there's the whole barrel aging story, which is where a lot of the timber elements came from. This is a render and the showing that in the final result. So then this is the barrel room. So you see the barrels and the jars here. The steel framing, again, going back to the workshop, and also the idea of the Horse Bazaar and the elements around that. There's obviously, yes, remind me, the hooks and things, which are reminiscent of tackles and elements like that. The rugs, which are a little bit hard to see here, they were custom made for the project as well. They are quite botanical, which talks to the ingredients that you find in Amaros. So there was always kind of, how can we link every element back to the story? And then for the actual restaurant itself, their focus is a lot on smoking and salting and preserving and local ingredients. So we really use those as a kind of heavy idea base for this space, looking at salt blocks and from, Mildura salt lakes, timbers smoked and charred. So there was a lot of conceptual ideas we could pull from. This is some of the early palettes that we focused on, and a lot of the elements came through the sort of white and pink stone, which is kind of reminiscent of salt blocks. We had some red travertine, which talked to kind of this earthy outback kind of colours. And then there was charred timbers and dark stones, which talked to the smoke and char idea. Big focus of the space is this large fridge that sort of has the preserving meat in it. So that was a big kind of component to the design of the restaurant. Here's some early sketches. And then, you know, how that then develops into our 3D land. We use Revit at Bagot. So a lot of these are developed by the team in 3D from an early sort of white card. And then all the information comes in and we give it to our renderers and they come up with these beautiful little numbers. So very close to the sort of final outcome, which is great. And there's some of our staff members pretending to be chefs. And there you can see at the front of the bar that beautiful red travertine and the amazing colours that come from that natural stone. Just some details as well. It's a very sort of moody space. It's quite, because it's at the back of the site, it doesn't get a lot of natural light. And we thought rather than sort of pretend that it gets a lot of light, to actually really just play up to the fact that it's quite inward looking. And, you know, it's quite a beautiful space to be dining and sort of focusing in. Further details, and handing over to Bronwyn, who will talk you through the guest room.
Thanks, Iz.
Thank you.
So similarly to the front of house spaces that Isabel spoke about, we really did carry through those core themes all the way through the project. And as Isabel mentioned at the start, the Next Hotel brand was actually redefining their brand at the same time we were doing this project. They had a CEO team come through. And so it was understanding what was next for the Next Story Group and Next Hotel as a brand, as Isabel mentioned before. And similarly, 80 Collins Street was also redefining a precinct within the heart of Melbourne as well. So we thought that was a really lovely opportunity to explore what was possible. And so for the Next Story brief, it was about creating a modern business retreat. And so for us to start that process, we worked both within our own internal team and also with Next Story Group's team to understand the demographic. So this gives a kind of an idea of a guest profile that we would go through, and with their team understand who they're targeting as their guest profile. And what that then allowed us to do was ask the question that what does that idea of a modern business retreat actually mean to the modern traveller? And as Isabel mentioned before, we were focusing on business travellers. So it meant for us, these are all pages out of our concept presentations that we did to the client. The core principles we decided on as a collective were that they're immersed in local culture and cuisine, being Melbourne, creating a sense of belonging and creating a sense of comfort and efficiency, all around that idea of the business traveller wanting to have a home away from home, but also for everything to be efficient. And as Isabel mentioned, the idea of moments in the front of house, these also continued through into the rooms. And so it really was about inspiring moments from home. So really that home away from home, and how do we create a sense of place for people? That local cultural overlay was really important to us. And as Isabel mentioned to you, in the front of house and the local artists, we were lucky enough to have Johnny Nishi come through and do some curated works for us that were then printed for the hotel rooms. The architecture that I mentioned at the start, which was the Woods Bagot and UN Studio collaboration, has this beautiful facade and some really interesting detailing. So for us, it was about how do we bring that into the room and celebrate that, because in it's off Little Collins Street, you don't really get the aspect to see the hotel close up from the outside. So how do we bring that onto the inside where you are able to experience it quite closely? And designing to a module was really important because all hotels have a budget to work to, and knowing the efficiency in the program we had to work to, it was really important that we were able to design in a way that was going to be efficient, and we would realise our vision rather than having to lose that through the design process. These same narratives came through both from the front of house into the rooms, as Isabel mentioned. So you'll see in the rooms, it's a finer detailing, and particularly with the Paris end component, looking at the fabrics that we used. The next layer were the actual design principles that we took from Next Story Group. So these are their in-house design principles, and how do we overlay those to create tangible experiences for the people that are going to be in the space. So our design methodology then from the moments that are inspired by architecture and the moments that are inspired from home, created up different zones within the hotel room itself. So we looked at the arrival sequence. We thought about a home away from home. Often when you're traveling a lot, it's an experience of eating and dining, and how do you actually feel like you're able to have your own pieces in the space and have a somewhere to sit and eat, that lounging and working experience, and then the personalization as well. And that was really important for us around how do you create a space that actually allows it to feel like your own home, and what are those moments of opportunity. This was a later sketch, but we just wanted to show how we then were able to overlay the zones in the different typologies. We had standard rooms, we had club rooms, and we also had suites. So these were evolved as we went through the design process. But given that kind of back of house nature, we wanted to show you, as Isabel said, it's not always glamorous. There is a lot of messy work that goes on in the background. But for us, it was returning to the architectural brief and looking at how that came through, and then how do we interpret that into our own space. Some of these initial concepts, as Isabel mentioned at the start, around the Horse Bazaar and the tack wall idea was really important to our concept. And so as we started to look at the joinery, and you'll see in these images, there's a lot of components that we were trying to standardize. So typical ones that could sit together and go into different configurations for different types of hotel rooms. And what this allowed for was a really efficient use of joinery, and therefore reducing the cost, and also the way that we were able to install on site was really efficient for multiplex, because we had a lot of rooms going in quickly. So we would have one joinery that would go to one end of the wall, and the other end would be open to help with ensuring that we could quickly install those into the space without having to template or measure up every room, which would increase the cost and obviously the program. We also were exploring bed heads. So where we had configurations where we'd have a king zipper, which is a king bed that when it's zipped up is a king bed, and when it's unzipped, it can be two single beds. So these are used a lot for conferencing type rooms, or when you've got kids in one room and parents in another. So we had to look at a bed head opportunity that would allow it to read deliberate when it's in zipped up mode, but also look equally as good when it's in unzipped mode. So all the sorts of things that we test as we go through, and some of the really early sketches playing with color and fabric options, how we sort of translate those and show those to the client and talk about the different fabric opportunities and detailing that we'd like to incorporate. This is then sort of a standard room that we develop. We then overlay color into the plan so the client can see really clearly how a room sits together. This was the smallest room in our configuration, and so we used this as the initial test platform, because we knew if we could fit everything we needed to into the smallest room, it would work for the larger. So looking at how we still created a really ergonomically sound but user-friendly desk, being it is a business hotel, looking at the module for the minibar, looking at the ample robe space and keeping everything enclosed that we needed to, sufficient luggage store, and our idea of the mirror wall at the entry with a little key tray, and that sort of tack wall that was still coming all the way through. And as you can see, the module stops at each end so that we were able to input them in really quickly. Also looking at the bed head configuration, and early on, as Isabel said, looking at that local art piece and how we bring that through to the rooms as well as the front of house. So that was a discussion we started early on, and with Studio Ongarato were able to deliver through to site. We then 3D elevate these. So in the same way as Isabel described for the restaurant, these are all drawn in Revit. They come into Enscape, and then we overlay with a little bit of Photoshop for the art. And this was a really quick and easy way, because we had quite a few different types of rooms because of the configuration of the architecture, which flips floor to floor. So we had about 20 hotel room types, which meant we needed to be able to quickly show the client what all the configurations look like. And this Enscape approach gave us a really easy way to do that. We then went into the full renders with our internal render team as well. And these are inward focused, just so we could see how the joinery would work with the hotel rooms. So that was our smallest room typology. As with the front of house, you can see early testing of design ideas for fabrics. So in our studio space, we grab reference imagery, we grab different types of materiality that we're looking at. Some of the front of house finishes would sit with the hotel room just to see how it would all play out as a holistic palette. And this was further development of the palette, the fabrics that we selected to have that Paris end reference, the timber and the leather look strapping that we had to reference back to the Horse Bazaar. As Isabel mentioned, we looked at the different types of stone that we could use that would reference back to Chinatown, but in a more abstract way, and that neutral base palette that would create that sense of home. And then this was one where we were testing the different laminate colors of where we'd go with the fabrics, and we ended up with the plum tone rather than the brighter hues, but you can just see how that kind of evolves as we go through. Another part that people may not be aware of is the prototyping process that we go through with joinery. It's quite extensive and intensive with hotels, just because by virtue, we're going to replicate it, in this case, 255 hotel rooms, so that you don't want to get something wrong and then replicate it 255 times. So the first part of the process, which you see on the left-hand side, is in the joinery factory. They set up all the prototypes of every different type of joinery that we were having in the project. We were able then to go through, test it. So we would sit at everything. We would pretend to use the tapware. We'd hang things on the hooks. We'd put things in the wardrobe, the minibar, use the fridge, put all the different items that would go into the minibar configuration, test that they all fit. We then made some minor modifications. They then come to site, which is this image you can see on the right-hand side, with our colleague Sarah, who's checking out it's sitting into the wall. So you can see here, this was an example where we put it in situ, and we made sure that the backing plate on this was working, so you wouldn't see the back inside of the carcass. But we could just test everything. So that once that's fitted off in that room and was signed off by the hotel operator, we then went into full production from shop drawings and the prototype drawings into the rest of the rooms. So this is some of the finished images of the hotel rooms. This one is a DDA room, so the wheelchair accessible room. So in this room, we made sure we had really wide turning circle spaces either side of the bed as well as at the end of the bed. As custom joinery with the minibar being altered, the desk being altered, and the robe to have pull down and handles for all the drawers so that it was easily accessible. And the desk was slightly altered with different GPO points, as well as the usual bathroom configuration. But we were really keen to make sure that anyone using these rooms who needed those extra facilities didn't have a lesser of an experience. It was all exactly the same level of finish as our other room types. You can see here, as Isabel mentioned before, the Johnny Nishi prints that you'll see featuring throughout the hotel room, our beautiful Paris end fabric that we worked with fabric companies to design. We then have the timber and the timber strapping detail and the leather look insert into the bedside tables, referencing that Horse Bazaar, and the tack wall kind of configuration you can see with the little key tray, the mirror, and then the stone that comes through on the luggage rack, the open rack for luggage, and then there's a closed wardrobe off to the side as well. And then that following through into the minibar. The minibar's got a fridge concealed in this cupboard here, so being up high so you don't have to reach down into it, and the 3 drawers that have all the other little bits and pieces, and using local produce in the minibar as well to continue that local theme through. Also having the subtlety of lighting used throughout as well, just to help to soften the space and again create that sense of home that was paired with the styling as well. This is a bathroom, so typical sort of bathroom vanity configuration here. And on the left, you can see again that prototype process. So in this example, you can see this was in the factory. We had a lower spout originally with a lower mixer. From testing it, we decided that we needed a higher mixer, so we changed that over as part of that process. It gives you an idea of where we're able to pick up nuances in as we go through that. These were some of the club lounge images, so similar to the other ones I showed you. We've got different configurations of the club room, which is really lovely. So this one looks out onto little columns, and so the view being this way, we've orientated the bed and the desk behind to face out to the view. It also allowed to create a separate sort of work zone and minibar kitchen zone, if you like. separate to the sleeping space, which was important for, we thought if someone's staying in this room all week working, you can sort of have a work lounge zone and then a sleeping zone off to your bathroom configuration. And in this one, you can see the tacked wall using a different approach to the entry mirror with the hooks and the little tray as well. These were then worked up in renders in the same sort of way. You can see that sort of evolution coming through and testing different ideas with the bedside tables at this point. And then as we move through to the suites, we're also looking at then how that configuration of that curved bed head in a freestanding form could come in to be sitting in the suites as well. So some of our rooms have the curve coming around and some have flat walls depending on the amount of space that they have. But continuing this joinery that we have in components, you can see that still fits into the room, but in different configurations. And then the way we had the plum tones in the standard room that you can see here, we then had the green tones in the suites and the club rooms. So just giving two different experiences depending on which room you're staying in. So this one had the fabric with the green fleck through. It's a bit hard to see on this image, but with the green stone relating again back to that Chinatown reference. And then the green look, the veneer and the green look leather, and then the laminate that came back through as well. We were also testing the idea of whether we bring some sort of cross-pollination of the different schemes through, but we left it in the end to keep it purely the green in one and the plum in the other. This is a prototype for the club room. So this configuration was set out to the exact dimensions of the room, from the joinery to the luggage rack and the desk and to the bed head, so we could test that dimension because we had a bit of space to play with. So we wanted to make sure we had the right dimension for the room. So this afforded us that opportunity. The vanity was sitting out of context in this one, but you can just see how helpful it can be to just make sure those final measurements are exactly as you want them to be in the room. This is another configuration of the club room. This is the final in situ photo. This one didn't have a view out, it was to the back side, so we made this a more internally focusing room. So you can see the back of the bed here focusing on the TV and the minibar, and you've got your desk and then the lounge suite off to the side here and much more internalized. This one's the one that you saw in the prototype room, so the minibar behind, the desk behind here, and then the bed head to the front. It gives you an idea of just how they kind of all come together in the palettes at the end. So lastly, to finish off, I'm sure the team will kill me for this, but a couple of our guys from project going to site, but just the reality of designer life, we had to present to the client in the morning, be out on site in the afternoon. So having to have a versatile wardrobe that'll work across, presentation mode and then onto site. But this is just part of the incredible team that were a part of making this project a reality. And we had a lot of fun along the way. It's a lot of hard work, but it's always a really rewarding experience when you get to the end and see it all come to life. So that's us. So with that in mind, there is the Q&A little function that you've got there. So if anyone's got any questions for us, please pop them in the Q&A session and we can answer them for you. Okay, so we've got our first question is, what would you say is the hardest part, please? And also, how did you address sustainability? So let's go with what was the hardest part first.
Well, I think Bron might have alluded to a couple of things just before. I think this building was actually being built around us as we were designing. So a lot of there was an older scheme by another interior designer that hadn't progressed, but they had actually started building from their floor plans. So there were set downs and toilets and locations in places where they weren't going to end up. So we had to do a lot of clever kind of shuffling of things, and it also meant our program was pretty tight. We, had to deliver things very quickly, especially for the rooms as well. Just the whole prototyping had to happen very quickly so that they could get it manufactured, so they could get it over here. I think, anyone that's worked on hotel, the majority of the time you're working to a budget. So there was a lot of trying to align budgets, still hold on to the concept and the ideas, and there was a lot of kind of to and froing. But I think that's a reality of most commercial projects, that they have to be hit budgets. So yeah, I think that was probably the hardest part, but it's probably just what we're used to as well. With sustainability, it was a remind me again, Bron, what was we had a Green Star pathway.
Yes, correct.
So we had an ESD consultant, and there was certainly from an interiors point of view, and we do this anyway as part of our practice, making sure that we're selecting materials that are sound from either a selecting low VOC, with veneers and timber, making sure that they come from sustainable forestry practices. And I think a big part of the local story was trying to get as much local as we could.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's where the joinery component came in as well. And that reason for being modular was not only from a constructability and a budget perspective, but also to minimise waste. So we worked really hard with the joiners to make sure we were adhering to panel sizes and minimising waste where we could. So that was another big aspect, because when you're doing so much joinery, it does add up very quickly. So yeah, it was really commendable of QIC to have that Green Star pathway as well, because a lot of hotels don't really focus on that sustainability side of things. So yeah, it was great to have that to work with too, and to have that consultant, as Isabel mentioned. All right, I've got another one for you from Sophia and Peter, which is a really good question. How do you make the final decision with colours and materials when there are so many different choices and ideas? And Sophia and Peter, I'm going to add to that, it's not just us, but then having two different clients in the room who also have different ideas. So QIC and Next Story Group, who also get a say in it. So process.
Yeah, well, I guess that's it. Like, final decisions are not often with us, but what we make sure we have is that sort of strong narrative early on, and a lot of the time that is actually in a way guiding us towards what colours and materials are appropriate. So we present to the client very early on, even before we get to the colours and materials, that narrative. So we want them on board. We want them to be on that journey, to own that kind of the ideas behind the concept. So when we do present things, the colours and materials and all elements that we can say, this is why we chose it, this relates back to the story, and they understand that. So in a way we're guided by our narrative, and that helps to reduce the choices in a way. Because yes, there's so many materials and colours
and beautiful new things coming out.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think to your point that was a really interesting part of the process, was that because of that strong narrative and all of the research that we did, that we were really invested in it, and our clients really did buy into that as well. And we would genuinely, we test each other, because we did see some beautiful things, but we're like, it doesn't really relate back to the narrative. Let's bring it back to what our core ethos was for the project. So I think that did help us a few times as well. And also as we found who the artists were we were working with, and particularly I know with the rug design, there was quite a process to make sure that was still true to the original narrative as well. All right, there's another really interesting one, and you'll understand why this is so interesting. One of our attendees, who is anonymous, has asked, they said that the pictures in the presentation and the colour palette seems to create a property interior that looks quite dark and masculine. And so they would be interested to know on our comments on that, given that the property's appeal is to non-male identifying guests. And the reason I say to Isabel, this is really interesting, is it was one of our key points that Next drove to us, was that when we think of the business traveller, it is not a male that we're trying to target necessarily. They said it's very much should be for men and women. And so a big part of our design brief was to make sure that it wasn't masculine or feminine either way, and that it was a space that really would respond to everyone who wanted to use it, regardless of how they identified. So, I know we've had some very long conversations about materiality and what makes something feel more masculine or more feminine. And I guess as part of that process, we talked a lot about, we wanted the timbers because they've represented certain things within our narrative to do with the Horse Bazaar and the Paris end of town, and the way that a lot of those reference projects sort of came to life through that, the brass and the timber and the leather and the tack wall. But I know we talked a lot about softening with the fabrics and with the rugs, and particularly the more decorative kind of, I guess, softer edges of both the furniture selection, the rugs, the stone even as well, and softer tones. So it's interesting that that's one of the comments we get, because it was something we obviously talked about at length through the process.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you probably could get the number of photos that the team was predominantly female. Certainly the design
from all
team.
consultants, actually,
Yeah,
which was interesting.
The end user, the hotel group, was mainly sort of represented by males. Yeah, I mean, as a designer, and also just, I guess, with my own personal preference, I sometimes probably don't necessarily see that kind of traditional male-female coming through, that masculine, feminine, because I like dark spaces where it's appropriate. I like light spaces where it's appropriate. Like, I like the whole gamut, because I guess when it's there's a concept or an idea behind it, or it's responding to its site, or it's for a particular person, and yeah, I'm not sort of going, oh, this looks a bit too like what a man would like or what a woman would like. I hope that it's just right for the space and right for the people. And I get it. We're obviously looking here at the bar, and there's it's sort of dark, and there's a lot of leathers and big chairs and things. But that's quite also a reflection on it being this sort of part of the concept of the celebrating the barrel aging. If it was done lighter, would that be relevant? Potentially not, but I totally understand. And interestingly enough, we were kind of aware, this is actually one of the spaces we were kind of aware of that sort of being overtly masculine. I remember when we presented the rugs, which are Catherine Martin design. They're sort of a Art Nouveau kind of style, very organic, sort of botanicals and things in it. That the client was like, this is great. This is like adding that sort of femininity to it. So yeah, there was kind of a bit of a yin and yang sometimes. This might be a bit more yang, and other areas might be a bit more yin. I think some of the guest rooms traditionally, I guess, the kind of tweedy type material, that sort of Chanel-esque, could be seen as quite feminine. So maybe there's kind of a pull in different spaces towards masculine or feminine.
Yeah, I think so. And an extension of that was, someone else has asked about, given that there were, a team of majority women, did we actually also seek male opinions? And there were a few guys on the team, so there were a few men, and we are fortunate enough to have a great representation of men and women, both in the interiors and the architecture team. So part of our internal process, as well as Isabel mentioned with the hotelier, we do our own internal reviews constantly. So we did have that balance, and from different backgrounds as well, which is always important for diversity of thought. There is another question is about tight timeframes, and does that put pressure on snap decisions, or leaving less time to have creativity to explore? And I guess to your point before, knowing that the building was being built and we had slabs being poured around us, we did have to make some critical decisions quickly. But I think to that question, that was the benefit of having a really strong design narrative that we could keep coming back to, and actually know that we could back the decisions based on that strong concept that we had. So we were able to make some of those decisions pretty quickly in the end, I think, which, you know, you'd love to have more time to explore sometimes, but sometimes you circle back to the original idea anyway. So
yeah, I think you know, we had a lot of amazing kind of ideas to draw from, and you know, as much as we were needing to make quick decisions, it still was quite a long process. And you know, especially for the front of house, we were still sort of able, because a lot of it was locally sourced, local joiner, we were still able to work right up to the last minute, sort of making final decisions. So yeah, you know, in a lot of ways also as a designer, it's good to have time frames because you can do anything. So yeah, it does make you kind of really sort of analyze what the decisions you're making and act on them and believe in them, because you don't have time to kind of fluff around too much.
Exactly. There is a question here that I can answer super quick. Who are the contractors? That was Multiplex, did both the architecture and the full fit out of interiors and did an awesome job. Another question, Prue Marks has asked, how important is it for very realistic Revit renders? Great question, Prue. Something we always grapple with as designers, how far do you go and how quickly? And you would have seen through the process some of our early hand sketches with pencil to try to get that idea across. And it really does depend on the client too, and what they want to see through the process. With the hotel team, we were very fortunate with Paul, who is our design manager from Next Story Group, was an interior designer himself. And so he understood how to read plans and could visually read space really quickly. But a lot of the members in his team were much more analytical humans and weren't the type of person who could easily translate a plan or a hand sketch. So we found in this case, the photorealistic renders were really important to sell that dream and get it over the line. Although sometimes to our detriment, as Isabel mentioned before, the gold curtain. Darren fell in love with it so much. He's like, you better deliver this just as it is because it's beautiful. I'll be so disappointed if it doesn't look just like the render. And no matter how much I said, it's just a computer generated image. He's like, no, Bron, you'll make it happen. I know you will. So Iz and I were sweating that one. So when it arrived in real life and actually looked like the render, we were like, oh, thank goodness. So
yeah.
And it does speak to a team effort, I think, with the renderers, though.
Yeah, and I just sort of say to that, the very realistic renders aren't actually from Revit; they're from whatever program our renderers use.
3D Max, yeah.
Yeah. So the white cards were from Revit. So yeah, we tend to find that if we want to really talk about materiality, Revit isn't the best for that often, though we do use Enscape, which is a component of that. But yeah, the ones that were really realistic were different program.
All right, well, we're at 3:59. So the last question, because why not, is there anything we'd do differently in hindsight? It's always a tough one. I can tell you some detailing things around the bar where Glenn and I, who were designing the details of this piece, we took the fluted timber around the corner right up to the edge of the swing door, and we put a metal edge on it. But knowing just how much use it gets, we really should have put a little panel next to it and not fluted right up to the edge, because the end panel's already seen a little bit of love, even though these guys are looking after it really well. So there's a few little detailing things that you never.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, like as a designer and you're in it for so long, quite often you go on site at the end, you're like, oh, picking up all the little things that you want to do differently. And then when you get the photography done and you get actually people into it, you actually start to you see it through everyone else's eyes and are less critical. But I'd agree with Bron, it's just some of the final detailing, and it's how we learn. You know, we're always learning through each project how we do it slightly different or better next time. You know, nothing is ever perfect, but hopefully it's good enough, and that, you know, people are enjoying the space, and yeah, it's a you know, a successful project.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's so odd not getting to see any of you and kind of just feels like Iz and I are just having a conversation amongst ourselves. But I do hope that was insightful and helpful to see some of the process and the nuances of hotel projects. And hopefully we'll all be out of lockdown soon, and hopefully you'll get to see all of the amazing projects that are being featured through Open House in person. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. There is so much great content out there. Have fun, stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you all in person in the near future. Thank you so much.
See you later.